case you weren't here, we started today with a discussion of the DIY phenomenon, which got into issues of food literacy and why certain people have cooking skills and others don't. We segued into talking about whether New York has lost authentic eats or whether we're actually in a golden era, which I think was the conclusion. That there's actually more gastronomic experiences in New York today than there ever were before. And then we just finished up a panel about looking back at the local food movement in New York and then looking forward at what the city government might need to do to create more spaces for good, healthy food experiences. And so if you think about this Edible Institute as a Maslow's hierarchy, maybe we started at the bottom of the pyramid with just getting everyone access to good food and nutrition, and now we're kind of towards the top in terms of what you call self-actualization on the one hand, but maybe enjoying good drinks is another way to think about it. And the night is upon us, so we can start talking about drinks. I'm going to introduce the speakers, but here's the context that I think we need to start with. New York is a big drinking town. It was a big drinking town before Prohibition, during Prohibition, and after Prohibition. I don't know the statistics for beer and spirits, and they might be hard to come by, but New York is always the #1 or #2 wine market in the United States, and always #1 in terms of imported wines. Some friends in the liquor business have told me that despite the recession, New Yorkers are still spending a good amount of money on alcohol and are actually, even if their volume of consumption has gone down, what they're willing to pay for that volume has actually gone up, and that's partly buoying the interest in cocktails, the interest in artisanal spirits, which can be more expensive. And I think that's an exciting place to be for people in the drinks business, and that's part of the reason that you see, as St. John just told me, that Brooklyn is now the third. Brooklyn ranks third in the nation in terms of a place with the most distilleries, right behind Napa and Portland. And of course, we'll hear from Garret on the resurgence in the beer community in Trent on wine. But it's a fun time and exciting time to be a drinker in New York City. Here's who we have, and I'd like to divide these speakers into two groups: the producers and the sellers. Although everyone's kind of in the selling business. Right here next to me is Trent Preszler, who's the CEO of Bedell Cellars, a 100-acre vineyard and winery on the North Fork of Long Island, one of the pioneers and one of the more acclaimed wineries on the island. Trent was raised on a cattle ranch in South Dakota. He got a degree in agriculture from Iowa State University, and most recently he's finishing up his PhD in viticulture at Cornell. And did I tell you, he's 33 years old, so he's one of the youngest CEOs of a winery in the world. Next to Trent is St. John Frizell, who is, I guess, first and foremost, an occasional contributor to Edible Magazine. We're always happy when he can find a little bit of time to write for us on drinks. He's got a long history in studying and celebrating cocktail culture and everything around it. And most recently, he opened Fort Defiance bar. It's more than a bar because it's open all the time, I guess. A cafe bar on Van Brunt Street in Red Hook, which I think is one of the most beautiful spots in the city. There's this giant picture window that fronts out of his bar onto Van Brunt, and it's a very pleasant place to go and eat or sip drinks. Next to St. John is Colin Alevras, who formerly was the chef and owner with his wife of the very popular and much beloved Tasting Room restaurant on Elizabeth Street. He segued from that to become the beverage director for the Daniel Boulud group of restaurants, helping, among other things, to bring the uptown chef down to the Bowery beer bar scene, and helping to open DBGB, which is still quite successful and bustling most nights. And now Colin is the beverage director for the Momofuku group of restaurants, including the new Peche. And finally, at the end, Garret Oliver, the founding brewmaster of the Brooklyn Brewery. There's a lot to say about Garret and the Brooklyn Brewery. Yeah. The Brooklyn Brewery, and I need to say this because it I think reinforces what we're going to talk about here. The Brooklyn Brewery's sales just in this past year have gone up 25%. For an established company to grow at 25% a year still is astonishing. And as Garret might tell us more, they're about to launch a two-phase expansion plan that will, allow them to meet even more demand than they already have. So, for someone who's been brewing in Brooklyn for 2 decades, it's very exciting to still see that sort of response and that sort of growth. Brooklyn Brewery sells its beer in 25 states and, more interestingly, in 17 countries. They're the leading exporter of craft beer from the United States. And Garret is also, I guess, when he's not brewing beer and traveling all over the world to make specialty beers with Italian brewers and Japanese brewer collaborators, he is finishing up editing the forthcoming Oxford Guide to Beer. Thanks so much for all of you joining us. So if I can start with Trent and Garret. Bedell also seems to be expanding. You see it popping up on more and more restaurant menus, in more and more retail settings. I got to imagine that your wine club is growing. How is it that you and Garret, that both of your companies are experiencing all this growth? What's driving that?
Should we pick up the mics?
Yes, please pick up the mics. And let's speak into the mics because we're recording all this so we can spread the word after the event.
Well, first, thank you, Brian, for having us. This is really great, and thank you all for coming out through the rain to hear us. Certainly, I think there are unique challenges with making and selling local agricultural products, and that's part of, I think, the life of a lot of people in this room, probably. And you may actually have already thought in your head, well, that's interesting. You don't really consider wine to be an agricultural product, but it is. And that's something that we've struggled with in terms of the growth of the local wine movement, is linking ourselves with this very sudden, what feels like kind of a sudden growth in the local food movement. So we're working very hard at, as Brian noted, at selling more and more of our products in restaurants in New York City, in particular, Brooklyn and Manhattan, expanding distribution. And a lot of people get into the wine business with some sense of romance of why they wanted to do it, and there's always a driving inspiration for why people get into wine. It's rare that people just sort of stumble into it because it takes such a large investment and a large commitment. But then a lot of people run into the sort of nuts and bolts of the wine business, and they start to realize quickly that being in wine actually is being in the distribution business. I think being in almost any business is like being in the distribution business. No matter how good of a product you make and how careful you are at making a beautiful thing that you hope people will enjoy, it's sort of goes by the wayside unless you can actually get it in people's hands and get it in their mouths and get it in front of them in situations where they're going to enjoy it and where they're going to see its beauty in the right context. And I mean, particularly with food, it's important that we taste wine along with food, because I actually think it is kind of a food product itself as well. So I don't know, that's sort of a roundabout way of addressing your question, but we're definitely working really hard at increasing distribution locally and getting people in our own backyards to understand that there's a world-class wine region about 100 miles down the road from you. So. And
the increased demand is there if you can get it to them, I suppose is what you're saying too.
Yeah, it is actually, and that's pretty recent. I mean, I've been doing this for about 10 years, and when I first started, there was a little more resistance than there is now. The concept, and we can certainly talk about this more, the concept of local wine is different in a place like New York because it is such an international city. It's different than a place like Portland where almost every wine on every wine list in every restaurant is from Oregon. And in New York, that's definitely not the case. In fact, about 40% of all imported wines consumed in the United States are consumed in New York City. So we compete not just against our brethren in the wine and grape industries, but against the entire world. So.
Does that jive with the beer situation?
Well, it certainly does, and it's interesting to me because except for I hadn't met Trent before, but I as I was saying, I one of the Bedell family. We go way back making beer together, in our kitchens back in the mid '80s. And I certainly know these reprobates up here. And I kind of feel like those of us who make drinks, it's all, and I use this word advisedly, there's kind of like a little drinks mafia, like there's the cocktail mafia and the wine mafia, and we all know each other, and we hang out together, and often we end up swapping ideas. So, we've made beers that are based on cocktails. We're making a beer right now that's aging on wine lees. I do a lot of stuff with wine. I guess in your case, we have made a beer infused with bacon, so that would be somewhat in a Momofuku-like direction. And I think that food definitely is the big inspiration. In this context, I guess the experience that I had, which is maybe most relevant aside from brewing, is that I was one of the founders of Slow Food USA, which was set up in 99-2000 by me, Carlo Petrini, Renato Sardo, Patrick Martins, who now runs Heritage Foods. And we set it up. We wrote the Constitution for Slow Food USA. And I later, after working on that for several years, worked on the international side of slow food, kind of the governing board that sets worldwide slow food policy. And the entire experience really gave me a different way of thinking about what we do and what kind of company we want to be. Partially as a result of things like that, we were the first 100% wind-powered building in New York City. And we continue to be 100% wind power. We don't buy any power from Con Ed. And as we are doing this expansion, and we're building right now, we're building in things that are going to allow us to be as green as we reasonably can manage in a place like New York City. I mean, for example, we have a lot of community gardens and groups that would like to come pick up spent grain, which actually is a great composting material. It's great for building soil, et cetera. But we didn't really have a way of getting it to them. It was just very cumbersome. Now we're going to have a special chute that'll just come down, and somebody can back into the place with a pickup truck, and we'll be able to just drop a whole bunch of spent grain to the back of their truck, and they'll be able to drive off with it, and it's not going to be any big deal. They can just tell us, when they want to come by, and we can just do that, rather than, it was never going to waste. It was going off to and becoming sort of feed for cattle and pigs, some of them which we actually met again, because we ate them. But they had a great life, though. Spent malt is wonderful stuff. They loved it. So, and it makes them quite delicious. So, we're thinking about these things as a very round thing, and I think that as a brewery, as we grow, we've actually become a lot more artisanal over time. And I think that anybody who goes into what they consider to be a craft or an art form, you have to ask yourself every morning when you look in the mirror, well, how am I not myself? Or how are we not ourselves? How are we fronting? No one's ever exactly what they claim to be. It's what you hope that you are, and how do you get closer, to the image that you have of yourself. And we work every day just to get closer to that. A lot of our materials come from far away. We're trying to bring them closer and to grow them, and to get more and more involved. So, it's all good fun.
And how about the blossoming of other breweries in Brooklyn? Is it nice to have neighbors in Red Hook and elsewhere who are brewing that you can collaborate with and spend grain stories with?
We have great neighbors. Not only around here. A great brewery opened up in Pleasantville called Captain Lawrence, making wonderful beers. And I think that it's been weird because we've had, over time, we used to have a lot of breweries in the city. I ran a group that was called the Metropolitan Small Brewers Guild, and we had about a dozen breweries in New York City only about 10 years ago. But what happened, interestingly, is that it used to be that the brew pub, a brewery restaurant, was the only place that you could get decent beer. And ironically, because you can now get decent beer like almost everywhere, the raison d'etre for the brew pub kind of goes away. And those people who weren't making great food and sometimes weren't making great beer either went pretty quickly out of business. And some of them went out of business despite making great beer. So New York City is a very tough place to do business. Every little bit of real estate is very expensive. And, I'm sorry that we have as few breweries as we do. And it really does have to do with those difficulties and the expensiveness of doing business in the city.
Well, that's a great introduction. So we've heard from two producers at established brands, a wine brand and a beer brand in the New York area, who have to continue to innovate to keep up with things. They are concerned about sustainability. Bedell is working on a big sustainability plan that they're beginning to roll out. So from the serving and making drinks with this stuff and pairing it with food side, I mean, where do you, I mean, maybe start with Colin. Where do you find yourself? I mean, it's got to be a more interesting time to be a beverage director than, when you were only choosing from Bordeaux, from Bordeaux's and
Sure.
Amstel Light.
I mean, when we first opened the tasting room in '99, it was sort of an experiment in what local food was. My wife and I had looked at the kind of restaurants that we had enjoyed traveling, and it always kind of came back to like this little place there and that little place. Well, it's like I didn't want to be so nostalgic and say like I'm going to try to reproduce a little restaurant from somewhere else in New York. It was like, well, if somebody was coming here, where would they want to go? And there weren't a lot of places trying to create local food that wasn't strictly either nostalgia or a particular, like, very hyper-specific region. And that, at the time, when we opened, this was '99, we decided to have an all-domestic wine list. At the time, I wasn't confident enough in the local product that was available. I think Long Island goes in fits and starts with identity, and it seems to, across the board, the quality has come up, and I think the wines and the wineries reflect that quite a bit. But even just having non-imported wine was considered quite a big deal at the time, and we still had people coming in going, really, they make good wine in California? And this is, 2000. You're thinking, like, really? Are we still having this conversation? And then trying to figure out, what did local mean? Like, how far away is far? And in doing that, and continuing to do that, we've seen things get better and better. I think the quality of local wine has certainly improved. Having more local beer around, it's only gotten better. I haven't felt anything sliding back. I think there have been some laws enacted in order to lower the barriers to entry, especially in the distilled liquor department. We're about to have some distilleries back in New York City, which is really exciting. I remember being really sad when the Shapiro winery closed down on the Lower East Side, and their stuff was horrible. I mean, it was not. I mean, you can be as romantic as you want to be. It wasn't good. It was cute. It was fun. You really wanted to support them, but it wasn't good. I mean, it was really like alcoholic grape juice in a very odd way. But when they closed, I was really sad, I was really upset. And now, we have the Red Hook Winery and City Winery, more breweries, and the distilleries coming in. So I think it just keeps getting better. And one other thing, you talked about slow food and Carlo Petrini. I early on had an opportunity to sit on a cheese tasting panel with Carlo. And, I was always kind of rooting for the home team, and, this was all domestic cheese, and it was a big deal. And sitting with Mr. Petrini and, just him going, well, yeah, it's pretty good. That's okay. And realizing, he was really not willing to let the home team advantage outweigh the no, great cheese has to be great around the world. No, we're really talking about everybody now, not just this is the best local cheese, but how does it rate on a world scale? And having permission to sort of hold everybody accountable to that level, and the producers responding to that because this is such a tough market, I think has really helped elevate everybody in a way that in some other smaller regions you might get away with stuff that's a little looser. So.
And St. John, I guess you're at a slightly different place in the food chain.
Well, I wanted to talk about what's happening in distilling, the subject that I wrote the article on in Edible Brooklyn, the summer issue. It was an article that I got interested in pitching 2 years ago when there was really no one making any kind of alcohol in Brooklyn legally. There were lots of people making it illegally. There were like a couple of Albanian guys that I found down in Sheepshead Bay. There was this hipster guy in Bushwick who was making absinthe from scratch, starting with like granulated sugar and bringing that all the way to absinthe. And it wasn't bad in this loft. But needless to say, none of these guys, especially the Albanian guys in Sheepshead Bay, were really interested in talking to me on the record for this article. So we put it off for a while, and 2 years later, I pitched the article again, and it's a whole new world from.
Can I just weigh in here?
Sure, Gabrielle.
Sorry, I just have to tell this story. I'm the editor at Oval Brooklyn. Should I talk into the microphone? Yeah. Sorry, I couldn't help it. St. John pitched me this story, and I was like, that's nice, but, you can't even photograph these people, and this doesn't really add up to a story. Maybe if you could find a third, then we could talk, but, good luck finding a third. So, so 2 years later, it's like boomtown. So take it away, sorry.
Yeah, 2 years later, it's a typical trend story because it's really happening now. So the guys are still making booze in their cellars, but I didn't have to talk to them for this article. I talked to guys who are actually, legitimate. Well, I talked to one guy who was making it in his cellar. I have a neighbor 2 doors down who's making some pretty decent rum in pretty large quantities in his basement. But all this is featured in the article. The only people making liquor legally, 2 years ago, there was a Chinese-owned company in Sunset Park making a rice wine distillate that was for drinking but wasn't sold in any store, wasn't sold in any of the fine wine and liquor stores in New York, and had absolutely no interest in speaking to me on the record about anything. So they had the first license. They got that in 2000 or so. And but this year has seen a real boom. There are guys in Williamsburg, the Kings County distillers. There's the Brooklyn Distilling in Sunset Park. Those guys are both legit and on the books. There's another guy making something called Brooklyn Gin up in Warwick Valley at the Warwick Valley Winery. That should be really interesting and should be on the market in October. There's Tom Potter, one of the founders of Brooklyn Brewery, teamed up with Alan Katz, who's the director of mixology for Southern Wine Spirits, and they're starting a big distillery restaurant complex up in Williamsburg, and they started the build out this week, I guess. And who am I leaving out? And then there's my neighbor Dan Preston, who's like this mad scientist who has applied for his license, and he's going to be doing low pressure vacuum distilling of cacao wines in Red Hook. And then there's my neighbor who's making the rum in his basement, who's trying to find a space to go legit. So that's 5 or 6. 2 of them are on the books and legal, and 4 of them are in the process of becoming legal. So it's like you went from 0 to 60. Now, as you said, when they all come through, it'll be the largest concentration of distillers east of the Mississippi, and the 3rd largest in the country, right behind Napa and Portland, Oregon, which is major, and it's all happening in Brooklyn, which is really interesting too. There's none lined up for Queens or Manhattan or the Bronx or Staten Island that I know of right now.
Well, one thing that was kind of interesting from this whole point of view, and I'm sure that with restaurant groups and with what you're doing, it comes into view as well, and that is until the sort of recent economic malaise, if you like, trying to get any new piece of property anywhere was almost impossible. I mean, it didn't matter if you actually had the money to pay what the property was worth. We went all over Brooklyn. We've been looking for 7 years. And you go to somebody and you say, okay, this is a great building for us. I think it's worth about $8 million. They'd say, yeah, it's worth about $8 million. Like, great, I'll give you a check for $8 million. And then we go just laugh. It's like, oh, well, in 3 years, it'll be rezoned for a hotel. I'm sure that it's going to be rezoned, and when it's rezoned, it's going to be worth $20 million, so why don't you give me $20 million? And you said, well, you just said it was worth $8 million. Well, that's today. And it's like, well, I'm talking to you today. It's like, well, you could put up a hotel. I don't want a hotel. I want to build a brewery, like, now. It's like, well, too bad. I'll give you a 6-month lease, and you could not have a normal conversation with anybody. And we ended up we're going into 16,000 square feet that's right next door that has been empty pretty much for years. And the guys simply wouldn't give it to us. And when the economic malaise started to happen, a lot of people started shifting their money around, and rather than warehousing property, now they're okay, I need to start bringing in some income, and suddenly people who have distilleries, people who have restaurants, people who have other things finally have an opportunity. Because when we first started in Williamsburg, you went out at night, there was nobody on the street. You're looking behind over your shoulder to make sure you don't get clocked in the head. There wasn't an ATM anywhere within 2 or 3 miles. There was very little there. It's been an amazing transformation that way, and a lot of things have been good, but the city becomes locked up. One thing I just want to bring back here for a second, it's one thing people may not know. Brooklyn was one of the great brewing centers of the world. There were 48 breweries in Brooklyn in 1900, and they made 10% of all the beer in the country. And so New York City was a powerhouse in that we had every kind of brewery imaginable. And I think what you're seeing now in all of this, and it looks like a trend, it looks like a fad, but I think what you're actually seeing is a return to normality. I think we always had the most exciting food culture in the world. We may not have gone into each other's neighborhoods all the time to eat it, but we had the most exciting food culture because we had everybody. We had such a great immigrant culture. We had breweries that made every kind of beer you find in Europe. We had wineries. When I was a home brewer, we used to buy all of our supplies at a place called Milan Labs. You remember it? Yeah. These guys were crazy. You could have, if you ever heard car talk, they were kind of like that. They were just really completely out of their heads.
I'm so sad that Milano
Oh,
Labs,
me too. There was a comedy show.
It was the only place you could go to get home brewing or home winemaking supplies. And
it served Little Italy. It served Little Italy. That's what it was for.
They absolutely understood. Oh, you want to make that in your basement? We can talk about that.
And they knew absolutely nothing.
Yeah,
about but that was the only place you could get the stuff.
Control, yeah, but they would help you.
Yeah, to do something.
Yeah, you could turn sugar into alcohol.
Yeah,
they're sort of like the magic supply stores on Broadway.
Yeah, the old
they could help
store.
you. But why are people all of a sudden, why is your neighbor making rum in his basement? Because he has time on his hands, or because there's interest in rum? Because at the one hand, you can't find space to expand a brewery. You can't find space to expand a winery necessarily. Farmland is very expensive. And there's a distinction, there's a difference here. You're very closely connected to farmland. The other industries, the other 3 representatives here are not necessarily. All the ingredients you guys work with could be bought elsewhere. So that's a bit of a, that's something that's worth keeping in mind. But why is that growing? Why are your neighbors doing that all of a sudden?
It's really simply put just a natural outgrowth of the whole DIY food movement that seems to be, I hope I'm not being too borough proud here, but seems to be located in Brooklyn primarily. There's a lot of people, who are making their own stuff, like learning how to butcher their own meat from Tom Milan up at the Meat Hook, and learning how to make their own honey, starting beehives and stuff, and making your own alcohol is just a natural outgrowth of that. It's it's a consumable, it's crafty, there's cool equipment, there's lore and history, and again there's a really big history of distilling in Brooklyn, both legal and less so.
And it's cool.
And it's really cool.
Yeah,
It's fun.
It's sexy.
And people want to buy it.
Well, and I think the 2 big things, if you look at also the Farm Winery Act in '76, it took, a good 20 years to get an established industry back on its feet. And I don't know when they started sort of Farm Distilling Act. It's only been a couple of years.
It's only been a few years, yeah.
So it's also it's theoretically legally possible. I mean, for the last, I don't know, since Prohibition, there was no way for less than an investment of several $1 million could you even contemplate legal distilling. It just wasn't, it was off the table.
Yeah, let me just say there that the laws have really opened up for making your own booze. A few years ago, the guys from Tuttletown Spirits got this sort of push through the legislature, this farm license. In theory, the farm distilling license is sort of a throwback to a farm tradition that's existed all over the world, which is you take your leftover grain or fruit or vegetables and you turn them into liquor because you want to preserve them and you want to be able to sell what's left over at the end of the harvest. The guys operating in Williamsburg are operating under a farm distiller's license. It does not require that you operate on a farm. It only requires that you use mostly New York State farm products in your spirit. So these guys are buying whole wheat from farmers upstate, bring it back to their 300 square foot loft in Williamsburg above a formal warehouse, and making whiskey out of it. And so that's like this block in Williamsburg is about as far from a farm as you can get in New York State. But they're operating under this license, and as you were saying about wine, now this whiskey is an agricultural product, and that's the way that these guys are thinking about it.
I think especially in an urban area, that idea is so important because it is linked to land preservation at somewhere down the line. So even though this place in the formal wear shop in Williamsburg is not actually a farm, they're buying New York. The best part about that law, I think, was that they insisted, the one thing that they didn't waver on was that all the products actually come from New York State. So they're growing whatever it is, the apples or the wheat or the barley in New York, and then it's being created and turned into something else at the hands of these artisans, and that's wonderful. But somewhere down the line, we're helping a farmer continue his craft and to continue to preserve open space and viable farmland in a major metropolitan area. So there's so many topics, so many great topics here.
Well, I almost have a question for Trent, and it's one thing that I see when I know a lot of people who are in wine, and I consider myself a wine enthusiast, even sometimes a wine geek. I spent a lot of time down at the 10 Bells, and they're sometimes when the natural winemakers come to town, they want to see who else is in fermentation. They come visit. Recently, Frank Cornelissen, who has a wonderful winery in Sicily, came to town, and he had dinner at my house, with a whole bunch of wine geek friends. Now, at a certain point, I did lose track of things, of the conversation, when they went into the ultra geekery that even I couldn't follow. But then we got into organic chemistry and left them behind, so it was all okay. But here's the thing. In California, and I find it weird, you go out to California, like you were saying, you see these all-American wine lists, and in a certain way, you're proud. The thing is, you go into a wine shop here, and California wine, there's just no way that you can make it simply about the wine. The wine is fantastically expensive, all of it, compared to stuff of similar quality, almost without exception, similar quality from Spain and France and Italy. So once you actually have some knowledge about wine and you start picking on simple quality, you go there. However, in California, people drink wine from California because it's from California, and they don't care whether it's more expensive. And I know the people who ran the Sonoma Wine Council and whatever. How do you think we can get to a point, and we do it with vegetables, we do it with all kinds of other things, we're willing to pay more for stuff, sometimes it's equal or sometimes it is better, or at least the same quality because it's local, and we barely will do that for beer. And I think that the problem that maybe Long Island has, and you can tell me if you do, is that New Yorkers are not as proud and as interested in things that are right from nearby as, say, people in California. I mean, drinking wine in California is like a lifestyle. We drink California wine, and that's all what it's all about.
Right, yeah. That's a great question. There's so many great aspects of that you could kind of tease apart. I think to take the first thing you brought up with the pricing, certainly the price-quality relationship in wine is something that's been breathlessly discussed in probably hundreds of academic articles. And there's a lot that goes into a bottle of wine besides the wine itself. And people try very hard to differentiate an agricultural commodity, grapes, and to make themselves different and their brand different and the wine different. And you can do that with wine in any number of ways, whether it's with packaging or the story about the people who made it or where the grapes were grown and how the grapes were grown, and all those things can contribute to the price and how you price the wine. And I think if you were going to sort of distill it down, there are probably two types of wine consumers in the world: the people who go into a restaurant and read the wine list from the left to the right, and the people who read it from the right to the left. And for some people, the region it was grown and the price are how they're going to make their decision. And for some people, the producer, the story of the artisan is how they're going to make their decision. And almost all restaurants, if you aren't familiar, will list their wines with the producer name first and the appellation or the growing region second and the price on the right. So I think it also comes down to a matter of individual taste and how people, what they appreciate in wine and what they see in wine. And I think we all, in any consumer product, when we reach for it, we're in some ways reaching for a little sliver of ourselves that we can relate to, that we see in the product, or maybe that we don't see in the product and we want to appreciate and learn something else new about ourselves. And then your other point, certainly you're right, there is not the local, this sort of deference and reverence toward local wine in New York that there is in a place like California. It's not as much of a lifestyle. What I alluded to before is that we sometimes wonder in our own industry, we have these discussions a lot, well, what does it mean to be local in such a massive international market where for anyone in this audience, there may be a lot of people sitting here who, aren't even native New Yorkers themselves, and for whom the concept of local is actually back where you came from or, whatever perspective you have on that matter. So it's something we talk about a lot, and the lifestyle in California certainly helps, and their volume certainly helps. I think, I don't know all the current statistics, but I do know that Long Island, we have about 3,000 acres of grapes total, and that would, in total, be a pretty small winery in Napa. My winery, for example, Bedell Cellars, it's 30 years old. We own about 100 acres. We make about 12 or 15,000 cases a year, and I think, for example, Gallo or other estates in California are making millions of cases a year. So your market presence is often driven by your volume as well. I don't know, I feel like I see a lot of nodding heads in the audience. People, I don't know if you want to chime in or...
Do you think there's a way to bring people to get interested in what Long Island terroir is actually about? Because we're actually aging beer on wine lees, botrytized Riesling lees from the guys at Red Hook Winery, and what's happening to this stuff is extraordinary. There's all these wild yeasts and things like that, and the beer is completely transformed into something else. And I'm getting interested in, well, what is Long Island terroir? What are the beasts that are living on your grapes? How do you think you can get people interested in whatever Long Island is about when it comes to that?
That's very interesting. We've actually recently started to talk about that more and what it is that makes Long Island wine special and what makes our wines at Bedell unique. For a lot of people, they don't honestly even know what it is, the characteristics of our region that make it unique, that it's a maritime climate. We have sandy soils. There's a unique flora and fauna of yeast and microorganisms in our grape skins that's different from everywhere else in the world. And our wines tend to reflect the flavors of the indigenous local flora and fauna. So our red wines, sometimes if you pair them next to sort of aromatic standards, you can pick out certain things in our wines. Our red wines are reminiscent of beach plums and wild strawberries and sort of brambles that you find in the dunes of the coastal areas of the Northeast. And the white wines have almost like a saline minerality that I think is reflective as well in the local environment. So we are just starting to, I think, drill down on those topics on Long Island and figure out what it is chemically and systematically, biotically and abiotically, what makes our wine region different and unique. And if we're able successfully to characterize that for people, I think it will help us in terms of reaching out and helping people understand what it is that makes our wine special.
I think it's also been a challenge as a buyer and a seller of Long Island wine. The region is so young and so small, it's not a place that you can conveniently pigeonhole in terms of style at all. And that, in some ways, works to their disadvantage because there isn't a coherent Long Island style. It's very difficult to discuss like Long Island terroir in total. I think early on, people tried to market themselves as very similar to Bordeaux, and I never really saw that Bordeaux and Long Island had a lot in common. And you know, now I think we're starting to see, especially like you guys, and I would think like Channing and Pominock, are developing distinct styles that now have enough of a history among themselves that you can at least detect, let's say, a quality curve, a finding of yourselves
Right.
that you can see from each winery.
Right.
But as a region in total, it's very hard. A lot of people, I think one of the advantages like Oregon had, which is again like a tiny region compared to California, but almost everything that comes out of Oregon is Pinot and Chardonnay. So it's
Right.
a little easier to go, oh, let's drink something from
And
Oregon.
and the state marketing infrastructure in Oregon is
Yeah.
lined up right behind that, whereas
Right.
New York
Yeah.
has been a very different situation.
Yeah, I mean, I think Americans often look for a handle. New Zealand equals Sauvignon Blanc. Pinot Noir equals Oregon and Burgundy. Napa equals Cabernet Sauvignon. And it's easy to understand, it's instantaneous, and it becomes an umbrella for many things which may be either poorly or well understood by the consumer, but actually it doesn't matter.
Yeah.
Because they say, oh, I want a New Zealand Sauvignon Blanc. Done, great, that's delicious. And, you know, that's the way American branding is driven, for better or for worse. And on Long Island, you're absolutely right. We haven't had the luxury of saying that here's the one thing that we all do and all do better than everyone else. As with most young wine regions in the world, you start out in your first years trying to compare yourself to everyone else to see, well, where do we fit in the global scheme of things? So for Long Island, the comparison was that we were the Medoc of the mid-Atlantic. We were the sort of upstart Bordeaux region of the New World. And that's what I think was pervasive through the 80s and 90s. And then people started to say, well, actually, our wines are a little higher in alcohol and extraction than Bordeaux, but lower in alcohol and maybe less sugar and sort of less on the fruit bomb scale from California. So we're right in between. And now I think we're even saying that's not acceptable. I don't want to have to spend my whole life talking about why my wines are the same or different from California and France. I actually want to start talking about why my wines taste like my wines,
Yeah.
and why Long Island wines are Long
I've
Island
never
wines.
met a guy in California that makes Pinot that didn't tell me it was Burgundian in style.
Right, exactly.
Fine.
It's the easiest thing to
Give
do. That's
up.
the place people go in their mind. It's like,
And all day today we're talking about doing things different. You know, we've got a different standard here. When we launched Edible East End, we decided we had to write about both forks because wine grapes were becoming the dominant crop in the region. And if not for wine grapes, all the potato farms would have just been developed or paved over. So obviously, New York wine, volume-wise, going beyond Long Island, New York wine is not looking for a mass market, right? So can't we just market it differently? Does it have to have the one-word descriptor, New York wine is X? Can't it all be about the stories, just like in the craft beer movement or the cocktail movement, where you could probably speak for 5 minutes about the cocktail you're making for someone? And I think wine selling has a very different, age-old international standard, and maybe we don't need to play by those rules in this area, or we should try not to play by those rules.
I wonder if it needs personalities, involved. I mean, I think that, when I wrote a book a few years ago called The Brewmaster's Table, which is about beer and food and related things. And one thing that was kind of innovative about the book is that it was full of actual pictures of the people who were making the beer, whereas previous books were pictures of buildings and pictures of signs and pictures of everything but people. And that people were what made the beer, and somehow managed to leave them out. And many of these pictures were the first portraits. These guys were absolute masters of their craft in several different countries, should have been like rock stars wherever they went, and were essentially unknown. And I wonder whether to develop that, as you have, I mean, certainly, not only is St. John one of the rock stars in cocktails, and we all know each other. I mean, these guys are all, they're 10 names that anybody who really loves cocktails can really come off the top of their head with. Same with chefs. It's people. I wonder, and it's starting to happen now, with for brewers as well. Putting yourself out there as well. And by the way, I did not wear this here this evening. I came back from Dallas. I apologize. I was on a promotional trip, being people in front of somebody else. But I think that you meet a lot of brewers who say, well, I don't really want to go out in public. I don't want to do this. And it's like the Woody Allen movie. You're not in the mood. You better get in the mood, because people want to know where it comes from, and if there's nobody attached. And when you meet somebody like Frank Corneliuson, everybody wants his wine, and the wine is great. But you meet Frank, you really want the wine, and I think that can be a big part of it.
Yeah, if I can chime in on the liquor end of that, I mean, you look at these guys making gin and whiskey in Brooklyn. It's like if they want to, compete in the big market, they're going up against Brown-Forman and Pernod Ricard, these huge multinational corporations and brands that have been around for 100 years or longer. And so if you want to try to sell your Brooklyn gin against Beefeater, it's like, good luck. I mean, these guys have truckloads of money. So, you can see these little guys trying to figure out a different way to market themselves, but a lot of the time they're too busy making gin. They're 2 or 3 man operations. I mean, they're really small. So I guess time will tell. In the meantime, it's almost a little bit painful to watch how they're trying to go about the marketing aspect of this. I mean, they're selling their stuff door to door. They're all putting their stuff in weird bottles and stuff. It's like the Williamsburg guys are selling theirs in like a little hip flask with a typewritten label on it, which they actually type in their 300 square foot distillery in Williamsburg. And then there's the, even Tuttletown now, their little round 375 mil bottles are kind of their hallmark, but at first they looked really weird. Now it seems like that was a pretty good gamble for them. They're selling, half the amount of whiskey for twice the price, and they seem to be actually making a living doing this, which is great. But a lot of that is about personality too. Like Ralph Lorenzo is one of the weirdest guys I've met in this business, and he's able to push this stuff, and the other guys have to be able to and have to learn fast if they're going to make it.
Yeah, they've been pushing it, but it's also getting accepted. More and more people are open to trying something they've never seen. Let's take a few questions from the audience, then we'll have more. We still have a lot of time. Questions?
For the distillery,
Sorry, will you wait for the microphone, please? Thanks.
with the distillery in Williamsburg, how are they getting rid of their byproduct, which in spirits is different than wine and beer?
Right. They're as far as I know, they have an agreement with a local farm, and I don't know the specifics of it, but they are trying to dispose of it in a natural, sort of organic way. The specifics of it, though, I can't really comment on.
And what about a lot of just mixing, buying the alcohol, where people now are just rebottling or renaming alcohol? Is that another industry you haven't mentioned?
Well, that's not happening in New York yet. I mean, that certainly happens all over America constantly. I mean, most of the American-made gin is called, compounding. When you take a neutral grain spirit and then just add flavoring to it, you're making a compound gin, and that will give you a wicked headache. By the way, you should avoid those brands. But as far as I know, I can honestly say no one in New York is actually doing that. They're all making their own spirits, and weirdly, all the gin makers in New York right now are making their own base spirit, which is something that that the big brands don't do. The big brands will buy neutral grain spirit on the open market, redistill it with herbs and spices and citrus peels and things in order to make their gin. All the guys in New York right now are doing something very unusual, which is making their own base spirit from whole grain and then redistilling that with the botanicals.
It's one thing people don't realize when you go out there and you buy like vodka and it's, it got one of the big names and it's $50 a bottle, whatever else. That stuff came in on a rail car from ADM. I mean, it is an absolute, it is a license to print money. They get a rail car in from ADM, and one rail car goes this way to the ethanol, thing and ends up in your car, and the other one goes that way, unless it was a petroleum cracking or something. But I mean, and it's all based on the way that our, our tax laws and everything else are written, et cetera. So there is a whole different basis for what goes on when people do these things. And you go down to Tales of the Cocktail in New Orleans, and I can tell you, coming from the beer industry, and I thought that the big brewers had money, I have never seen so much money in my life. I mean, it's just unbelievable. Little guys are really struggling against just almost unbelievable power.
And the fact that most drinkers don't know what went into the Beefeater gin, or for that matter, wine that's made essentially using chemistry and grape juice being blended from everywhere. So, I mean, but that's a different way of marketing, is selling the smallness, the artisanal.
And let me just say that one of the things also is that the big brands aren't bad. Like they taste good. Beefeater gin is a good gin. It just so happens to be an enormous brand. But they're going up against brands that are not only established and rich, but also make a pretty high quality product.
Yeah, and I mean, it's also the consistency time and time again. Even with, big brewers, it may not be interesting beer, but it is almost amazing that they can make it that similar that often. Getting people to try artisanal spirits is sometimes a challenge, but it's kind of fun. I mean, usually, if people are open to it at all, you can usually turn them on to something interesting, and then they're usually mad at you because they can't find it again anywhere else, and then they get over it when they come back. But it can be, you really have to be committed to that product as well as a bar person. You're going to pour a lot of samples. You have to get it in front of people.
Right, and you also have to help them understand that there may be inconsistencies. The primary difference between an artisanal product and one that's made in greater volumes is that the artisanal product is probably going to change from year to year. Certainly with wine, there are imponderables like the weather that change every year and make our product taste different. And there are things that are beyond our control. We try to minimize vintage variation as best we can, but I actually love the vintage to vintage variation in wine. I think it's one of the things that makes it so wonderful and so unique. Every time you open the bottle from a different producer, a different year, it's sort of a mini adventure. So
it's interesting, as in beer, it's actually exactly the opposite in a certain way. I mean, brewing is actually a lot more like cooking than it is like winemaking. It's year-round. If you have a beer and you say this is, X beer, then when the ingredients change, and they do, you have to adjust what you're doing to get the same flavor profiles. The same way that a chef is never working with the same piece of meat, is never working. We all know that if you get jalapenos, they look the same from one moment to the other, and one's really, really hot, and one's really, really mild. And if you just have a recipe that says do this and that with jalapenos, you can't cook. And so, what started off in beers that people thought inconsistency, and this is true of beer, not wine, but inconsistencies was craft. And what's happened now as American brewers have gotten very good is that the consumer now is very sophisticated, does not see inconsistency as craft, and realizes that if you're making a beer under the same name and it's different every time you have it, what that actually means is that you can't brew. Not that you're artisanal. It means that you actually don't know what you're doing. And when you're asking somebody to pay, we have a lot of bottles of beer that, this bottle of beer is $10. And you worked hard for that $10, and this is maybe a small luxury in your life, might be a small luxury in my life, and I promise you it's going to taste like this, and my name's on the bottle, and everything else, and that's our brand. Well, that's a promise. It's supposed to mean something. So we have the largest program of true bottle re-fermentation in the United States happening right there in Williamsburg. You know, we can hold 30,000 bottles at a time. We have rooms full of barrels. Some of you guys have seen them, where we're aging things in bourbon barrels and all sorts of other things. But you have to apply to it a certain level of rigor. And it's fascinating to me that the consumer becomes sophisticated, partly because, you know, we help teach them. And then it becomes a problem when you have, like, if there's anything wrong, now they know. They're very sophisticated about, you'll get emails. I got a whiff of, of this and whatever. You're like, oh. So we have to be paying really, really close attention. And it's a funny little conundrum that we have. We talk about the dark side in producing, whether it's wine, beer, or whatever you're doing, and the fact that there are breweries literally that are out there trying to make their beer more cloudy by adding additives, to make the beer look cloudy, because they taught them that this kind of wheat beer was supposed to be cloudy. And the yeast would settle to the bottom, and it's like, now it's not cloudy, and you told the consumer that it was supposed to be cloudy, and now they put in something to make it cloudy. And that's how the big brewers go do those things.
We have another question over here.
I was interested in trends. Where do you guys flavor profiles, cocktails? What's next?
That's exactly what I was going to ask.
I'll talk about cocktails, or the spirits coming out of Brooklyn right now are really focused on the flavor of the grain that they're made with, even the gins. So, like I said, in Beefeater, or I keep calling them, but you can name any of the big gin brands. The focus is on the botanicals, the things that are added, which include a lot of herbs and roots and citrus peels. In the Brooklyn products that are coming out right now, and I'll also say with the whiskeys, with the mass market whiskeys, there's a lot of emphasis on the barrel, on the aging. The aging is what gives most of the mass market bourbons their flavor. With both the whiskeys and the gins, the focus that are being made in Brooklyn, the focus is on the flavor of the grain that the base spirit is made with. So you're talking about wheat, rye, barley, and corn. And so that's something brand new and really weird, I think. And so you're getting these white whiskeys or moonshines out there that are unaged or minimally aged whiskeys that taste like corn or taste like wheat. And all of them right now are working on rye. So I think it's kind of a challenge for a bartender who makes drinks, because we're so used to dealing with different types of gins and whiskeys. We almost have to think of this category as something completely different. Lump the new gins and the new whiskeys together and think of them as like a grain eau de vie. Something that really carries the flavor of the grain. So it's a challenge. I know with the Brooklyn gin that's out on the market now, and with the moonshine that's being made up in Williamsburg, there's such a challenge to mixologists that they're really having a hard time working with them. I have not seen them on anyone's cocktail list yet. I know I will, but I think that the bartenders out there find them really challenging, and it's going to take a new way of thinking about mixing drinks.
Yeah, I would have to concur with that. I mean, one of the things when you're trying to make artisanal spirits is to differentiate yourself and to highlight your ingredients rather than create a stable platform for citrus peel over a million cases. Ideally, if you think about the golden age of cocktails and Prohibition, the idea was to mask crappy booze. So now if we make the booze better and better, jobs as bartenders, as terms of mixologists making drinks, these things don't cry out for mixers in quite the same way. And I think you really have to find very, very specific flavors that match these liquors, because they're not interchangeable in the way that, dry London gin, you can pick your favorite, but you're within a fairly narrow range. You know, white whiskey doesn't mix like vodka. And if you're going to go through all the trouble of finding the space, getting the still, malting barley on your floor in your loft, the last thing you want to make is vodka, you know? So there's definitely an interesting challenge. And these things aren't necessarily best drunk straight. So finding the right little match is going to be interesting. And they're going to be very, very specific cocktails, I think, around them.
Have you seen on anyone's list either the Kings County Distillers stuff or the Brooklyn Gin?
No, not yet.
I haven't yet either. And I mean, it's
I'm gonna
coming.
have to go get some, yeah.
I mean, I have some. I've been working. I think I'm going to put a Brooklyn Gin cocktail on the list soon because I think I'm almost satisfied with one. But it's been tough. It's been really tough.
It's really challenging.
And this stuff doesn't work in a lot of the old gin recipes that were made for London dry gins.
Well, we're in a different position, you know, in beer because interestingly, when I started 21 years ago, wherever you went in the world, American beer was basically a laughingstock. And things have completely reversed where we have, I mean, brewers come. We were the first brewery in the United States to do brewing collaborations with foreign breweries and did many, many of them before, you know, it started to actually, a second brewery started to do it. And it turned actually into a big trend. That's one trend now is collaborative brewing, and we still do a lot of that. But now people look to the United States as the driver in the world for creativity in brewing, and our skill has hopefully caught up with the creativity. We always had some creativity, which hopefully has also gone on, but you get to watch what happened in the United States over and over again in other countries. Italy went from 50 to 320 breweries in like 3 or 4 years, and the beers are awful. I mean,
some of them are really, really good.
A few of them are really, really good. I judged the Pianetta Birra, you know, blind competition, and it was the toughest 2 days. We were just, oh man, we were destroyed. But the thing is that they're so on fire to create things, and they haven't learned to make beer yet. So it's like they want to put 8 different things. Like, dude, you haven't even learned how to make pale ale. Why do you want to put, you know, he's got 12 different ingredients going in there?
Well, because they think of it as food.
Yeah, yeah.
They don't, you know, like there's no. The thing about like Italian brewers I've seen is that American brewers, there's a thing in the beer world called session ales. These are your standard drinking beers. This is what, you know, we have a tradition of you go to a bar and you drink beer. You don't eat at the bar, you drink at the bar. And this is an English, you know, an American thing, and German to some extent, but they eat a little bit more. The Italians, I don't think, have anywhere in their head that you would just go somewhere and drink.
Yeah.
So it's always something that it's not designed as a standalone beverage. You're meant to eat something.
If you go out
and
in
then
Italy and
drink
you want
this.
to just drink, your parents will show up later that evening. You know, so there's like no youth culture. It's a different kind of place. But coming back to trends, barrel aging is a big trend. So I mean, something which used to be just a container now is a way of either growing microorganisms, allowing microoxygenation through the wood, or picking up flavors out of the wood, or picking up flavors out of what the wood previously held.
Yeah.
You know, basically one of those 4 things.
I think, you know, the wine industry has spent like 50 years trying to get rid of Brettanomyces.
And
the beer guys are like,
we got
bring
it.
it over. You know,
You guys want some?
Yeah,
Yeah,
they're all over. Every
We've
new
got plenty.
beer is
Absolutely.
like made with Brettanomyces, and I see the wine guys are just like,
That's a big well,
Really?
you know,
Really?
sour
Yeah.
beers. I mean, that are really being influenced by the old Lambic tradition in Belgium. And what's interesting, and this is the part that people can't see, is we make one beer that's barrel aged and then re-fermented, and it takes months and months and months to make. And yeah, it's pretty expensive. It's like $20 a bottle. The price of barrels that we buy have gone up, have tripled in the last few years, partially because other brewers are taking them up, but largely because as China and India now have disposable income, the first thing they look for is meat, whiskey, and beer. And they want bourbon barrels to age their whiskeys, and now they come in, they lock up contracts, and all of the wood is pulled out of the market.
I just wanted, before we go into the next question, I wanted to address your question really quickly from the perspective of the wine industry.
And maybe also not just New York wine industry, but maybe wine drinking in New York too.
Well, I mean, to be honest, when I hear the word trend, I get the little hairs on the back of my neck stand up. I mean, I hate to sound like a curmudgeon-y farmer, but we don't really have ingredients. You know, grapes are our ingredient, and the very best wines in the world come from grapevines that are between 30 and 80 years old, and our vines have just actually started to turn 30 in most of our vineyard sites at Bedell Cellars, and we're really excited because now we think we're entering our prime. And there are all these trends swirling around in the beverage industry, and I'll give you one good example from our perspective. We had a block of Merlot that wasn't performing so well, about an acre, 5 years ago, and we decided, well, Syrah is pretty hot right now. Let's plant some Syrah, and we'll use it in our blends. We have a wine called Taste Red, which is a blend of Merlot, Syrah, Cabernet Sauvignon, and Cabernet Franc. So we're about a week or two away from harvesting our first vintage of Syrah from our vines, because as you know, with grapes, it takes 4 or 5 years before you get your first viable crop. And last week or 2 weeks ago, I saw an article by Eric Asimov in the New York Times saying that American Syrah is the weakest of all red varieties. The sales have plummeted, and they're predicting doom and gloom for sales of American Syrah. So, we take such a long-term approach to everything we do, and if we made a decision today based on some trend, in most cases, because we're an estate farm and winery, we wouldn't really even be able to capitalize on that or realize that vision probably for 3 to 5 more years of investment. So, we try to stick with what we think is best for our climate and for our soils, and our job is really to shepherd the fruit from the field to the glass with as little intervention as possible. So.
We'll take a couple other quick questions. Did you have one, Alexander?
I was wondering what kind of wood you're using to age beer.
Mostly right now, wood from the Heaven Hill distillery, which makes Rittenhouse. So we did Rittenhouse rye, and probably the preponderance of it is from Woodford Reserve. So one part of Brown Forman Group, another one sort of more family owned. But what's happening now is that I used to talk directly to the master distiller at Woodford, and he would actually change the schedule on which he was emptying his barrels based on when I needed them. So he would basically, it's called dumping the barrels. Doesn't sound nice, but he would line up the dumping of his barrels for when my truck was going to be there. We'd pick them up and they would come straight down to Brooklyn so we could fill them immediately. And now they actually have a company set up in between, which is like their barrel sales company, and the whole thing goes upwards. I think that, to the point of what you were just saying, I was asked to give a talk at a wine conference in South Africa a few years ago, and which was really fascinating. And you see a lot of people making stuff. Sauvignon Blanc is a good example that they really can't make. And there are other things that they really should be doing that they actually do well. But during the day, that same day, word came to everybody that a big winery, Constellation Wines, big international winery, had bought this tiny little brand called Indaba, and everybody was running around pulling their hair out that the Death Star was coming and they were all going to be destroyed. And I had planned. They asked me to come talk about how to be a small producer in a world of large producers. I mean, to give you some idea, Sam Adams is 20 times our size, and then Anheuser-Busch InBev is 200 times their size. And you guys are dealing with the same kinds of scale. But the thing is, at the end of the day, I end up giving a completely different talk. And I said to them, you know what? Those of you who are running around worrying about, this Death Star is coming, you should do the rest of us a favor, pack your bags and go home. We don't want to see you. We don't want to smell you. We don't want to look at you. We want to hear from you anymore. Get out. Because there was something that made you want to go do this, and it wasn't to make the next Yellowtail. That's not, why you became a winemaker. It's hard work. It's really hard work. Brewing is hard work. Running a bar or cocktails or whatever else, it's all really hard work. If you don't have anything in your soul that makes you say, this is the thing I came to do, then just get the hell away from the rest of us. do the thing that you came to do it better than anybody else, and you'll be fine. It's going to be tough, but you'll have fun.
And when you look at the statistics of winery growth in New York, to look at one trend is, we just passed 300 in the state. There are dozens more every year. So there are more and more passionate people who have tasted something they really like, who have some sense that this is a livelihood that they want to pursue. And that's the dominant trend. Regardless of what happens to Syrah consumption or anything else, is there's going to be more and more wine produced here, more and more beer produced here, more and more spirits produced here.
Yeah, I think we actually, this whole night can coalesce around the one major trend, which is the pursuit of the new. And I think people maybe are tired of the bigger 20 million case brands, and they want something that's different and special and local and important to them, and maybe important to people who they know personally who made it and invested themselves in it. So, maybe that's what this is all about, really.
Yes. A question?
Yes, I do, if this is on. So Trent was talking earlier about distribution, and I have a question I wanted to say that there's a great small, I won't use their name because I think that they're a little skittish because I don't think they're legal yet. But they have a CSA in Brooklyn, like a liquor CSA, which I think is fabulous. And they're actually...
Yeah, that's definitely not legal.
I'm sure, oh my God. But the stuff is so good. And
What are they making?
They make all sorts of wonderful things. And actually, they make like a limoncello.
Oh, yeah, I know this.
You know who I'm talking about? Which is amazing. And they make all of this really interesting. I actually don't know if they make their base liquor or not. Or
Define
kind of
wonderful limoncello.
Huh? Oh, but it's... You did? Okay, well, I can't get into their CSA because they get such a high demand, which brings me to my actual question. So I'm not a hipster, so I don't really know where to find any of these things, but I am a drinker. I'm not an Italian. I will go someplace and only drink and not eat a thing. Where should I go in Brooklyn to find some of these really small producers, maybe even not legal yet, that don't have CSAs? Like, where can I
That would be
find
my
them?
place.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, I've got some of my neighbors' bootleg rum in my truck right now.
Yeah.
But no, I mean I carry all that stuff, and I think I talked to Brad from Brooklyn Gin this morning. He's now available in 30 retail outlets and 5 restaurants and bars. I don't know why the restaurants and bars seem to be a little bit reticent about this, but eventually they'll all catch on. These guys, they're not making a lot, so they have to really think about where they're putting it. And they're not making enough for demand right now. So the demand is higher than the production. They're all growing, sort of in fits and starts. Right now, Colin and David from Kings County are looking for more space. They just hired a night crew, so they're making whiskey around the clock now. Brad at Brooklyn Gin or at Brooklyn Distilling just bought a big mash tub so he can ferment more efficiently and faster. So I mean, all these guys, the news for them right now is good. People want their stuff. There's a lot of people like you out there. They're just having trouble getting it out. There's a couple of really good liquor stores in the borough. I think probably Astor Wine and Spirits will probably carry all the local stuff. And there's a shop down by me called Dry Dock Wine and Spirits, and they carry all the local stuff too. And I have it at my bar, the legal and the not so legal. So if you ever want to come by, you can
Yeah,
have a
again,
taste.
Go into any good bar and ask for it, and they'll find it. I mean, if you demand the products, we'll carry them.
yeah.
I mean, that's the challenge, is we want people to come in and ask for stuff like that, because, I have plenty of stuff behind the bar that, it doesn't sell itself. Nobody recognizes the label from 4 feet away, so they don't even know to ask for it. But the more you ask for it, the more people will carry it.
That's a good point. In fact, it's part of New York State law that the farm wineries products, if they're registered through a distributor, are available for sale at any account. So if you walk into a restaurant or bar and ask for a wine and they say they don't have it, they certainly can get it, even if they claim that it's quite difficult for them to get it. You have the great fortune of living about 90 miles down the road from America's coolest ascendant new wine region on Long Island. So if you can't find it in your local haunts in Brooklyn, you can hop on the Long Island Railroad or the Hampton Jitney or rent a car or get a zip car. There's about 40 ways you can get there. You could even take the seaplane or the helicopter if you were so inclined. And once you arrive, there's 35 or 40 wineries and vineyards right sort of within easy access of the beaches and great restaurants. And Long Island's wine country is very condensed. So unlike, for example, Napa, where there's thousands of wineries and you could drive for days and it's quite bewildering if you don't actually know what you're looking for. Long Island, it's about a 10 or 15 mile strip on one main road. It's called Main Road. And you can just go down the line and taste everything to your heart's content. So that's what I would recommend.
And there's a relatively new distillery on Long Island too, Long Island Spirits. So even that trend is moving out to where we are.
And they're using potatoes, right? Long Island historically is a massive potato-producing region, and a lot of the old potato fields have been replaced by higher value-added crops, such as grapes. But there's a distillery, I think, in Wading River. It's Long Island's first potato-based vodka.
And like these guys in Brooklyn, they can't keep up with demand. I was there recently. They had 4 giant, 100 weights of potatoes coming in, and they had several more of those coming in just that day. And all that was going to be moved out as soon as that batch of vodka was done. So that's a good trend. Even if these are young industries and they're still figuring out what to do, there is the demand to support them while they figure that out.
And one thing everybody's interested in, I think, is because I've had several people kind of come to me looking for information, and I've been reaching out to other people for information on older varieties. I mean, just the same way that that flavor has been bred out of tomatoes and pigs and pretty much everything. Flavor has also been bred out of grain. I mean, it was one of the for brewing, when you had the rise of the mega brewers, number 30, if it showed up on a list of attributes of what they wanted, was flavor. Flavor was what they didn't want. So barley used to have lots of flavor to it, and wheat had flavor, and steadily, if you are a wheat farmer, well, who do you want to come calling? Well, the Wonder Bread guy who's going to buy your entire crop. And what does the Wonder Bread guy want? He wants wheat with no flavor at all.
So 11% protein.
Yeah, he wants this percentage of protein, he wants this percentage of nitrogen, et cetera, et cetera. The mass brewer wants the same thing, no flavor at all. So all of this gets bred out, and the whole thing becomes this monoculture of stuff that's not available. So when the whiskey producer or the beer producer goes out to buy, we have to, in order to make flavorful beer, ironically, buy foreign grain because they're still growing crops that make flavorful malt because they make flavorful beers in those countries. And you have to try to we're trying to get it to a point where we can work with the farmers, guarantee their crop, tell them, okay, we will take it. But it's really, really tricky because for brewing purposes, you need something very specific. And so we're looking at working with farms and actually growing hops upstate, growing barley upstate, and find out how we can actually do, if only on a small scale, some of our own malting and some of our own hop growing, and make use of that in some beers so that you could have a beer that was like a 100-mile beer where you didn't have to use any ingredients from outside. But it's, if you can imagine, if people here in New York City who are running restaurants, if in order to get some decent pork, it had to come from 500 miles away and there was nothing closer, that if you're interested in local agriculture and local everything, that really puts you in a weird bind. So we're sort of working on that. But I think that a lot of industries have to start to coalesce. A bunch of little guys have to get together and go to somebody and say, okay, we're, as a collective or something, we're going to buy, we want to plant this seed variety from 50 years ago that had a lot more flavor than what I can get now, and we'll guarantee you a certain price.
the CSA model on it. I mean, the parallels between what we were talking about earlier in terms of people's acceptance of ugly tomatoes and oddly shaped vegetables in the kitchen, and now acceptance of something that's not the same, or a gin that's not uniform from year to year. Hopefully, what's happening in green markets gives us hope for what's happening in our liquor cabinets. Unless there's any dying last remarks that folks or questions, yes, this gentleman.
I just had one brief thing. I'm a beer seller in Brooklyn. I sell craft beer. And something that Garrett said earlier, and just what you were just saying in terms of consistency and having the consumer revel in differences. As a retailer of craft beer, I'm constantly trying to get the customers to understand that, first of all, their beer is not going to be available all year long. It may only be available for a week a year. And secondly, that it's not going to taste the same every time. This is what in my opinion, what the big brewers spent a century destroying beer culture by making their beer taste the same everywhere in America all year long. So what I wanted to say to Garrett is, I understand that a lot of times you're probably confronted with the fact that you are dealing with massive chemistry experiments and trying to create consistency, but maybe to hear the other side of that, let your beers live and don't be worried about the one guy that smelled DMS in your beer one day. And there's plenty of, Danny Perignon from Fantôme, his beers are different every time, and there's all kinds of bad flavors in there that I taste, but his beer is awesome, and every customer I sell it to thinks it's awesome. So,
well, I'm down with that in certain things, but I'll tell you what, I don't think you never visited with us and see what we do, but when we went to do bottle re-fermentation, we're the only ones doing it actual old school. The beer is bottled flat. I bought a bottling machine on purpose that cannot put carbonated beer into the bottle. To remove the net, burn the boats, whatever cliche you want. But, however, whether you talk about Schneider Weiss, which I think still is the best Weiss beer in the world, that's also done completely old school. And all my favorite ones from Saison DuPont, throughout these areas, you can make something really individualistic. And I think that what we're doing is really individualistic. We make, Sriracha Ace. You haven't had another beer that tastes like Sriracha Ace anywhere, and you're not going to. But if I tell you that Sriracha Ace...
There's that new one from Hitachino.
yeah.
It's got Sriracha Ace in it.
Well, and I brought them. I just want to make sure they don't buy up my whole crop. That's all. Just because I brought it to them. But anyway, that's a long story. But the thing is, if I tell you Sriracha Ace tastes this way, here's my question to you: do you want it to taste different next week, or would you like me to try to make that beer, which is very individualistic? Do you want me to deliver you a really nice version of Sriracha Ace on a regular basis, or would you like it to just be something else next time? And you kind of, you're going out and you're going to spend, I'm asking you to spend like $12.99 or $13.99 for this, and the question is, what have I promised you? Is it anything, or is it nothing?
Well, it's interesting too, because within the industries you get different levels of stability. Certainly in distilled spirits, you certainly have the most stable product once it's in a bottle. And with wine, we've got a product that's moderately stable, if inconsistent year to year. Once it's in the bottle, it's going to develop at a certain rate that's at least on a human time scale.
Right, it'll change and evolve.
And then with beer,
5 to 10 years.
But these guys, they get one shot a year at getting it right. If anything goes wrong, if this rain turns into hail tomorrow, they're screwed. Like, there's no going back. The liquor guys, all right, something goes wrong, you don't like the way it's developing, you can still take that alcohol and sell it off to somebody. Not certainly on a tiny scale, but a lot of the great bourbon houses and even, Scotch houses, most of what they do is get rid of the stuff they don't want. Redistill it.
Redistill.
Yeah, but they don't even bother to sell it. They're sort of overproducing for a reason. And at least with beer, if you don't like a batch, it's not going to kill you to say, you know what, all right, we're going to get rid of it. But again, you're talking $12.99, he's talking $30.99, and for liquor, you're up to $50, depending on that stability. So it's
we do sell some beers that are $25 a bottle, and the thing is that from one year to the next, I feel I can make that quite different. But just last night there are a lot of beers that we make that are not available to the public on a regular basis, and we have 15 or 20 different things going all the time. And they'll make it out in public occasionally, especially this week. It's New York City Beer Week, by the way. So there's stuff going on. We have beer that's aged in on cacao nibs from Friends. We have the stuff that I was talking about. We made a beer last year that was infused with various botanicals to taste just like a Manhattan. There are all sorts of things, and that actually went out to the public. We have test batches that came out years ago, which we've now aged 4 years to start to take on real Sir Lee character. So there's all kinds of stuff that you can do. My point was that consistency for the brewer. I mean, when you go to a restaurant and you get a particular dish that the chef is making, you want the chef to be creative. You want him to make that dish for you, but you don't want it to have the same name and be completely different every time that you get it. And I think that part is actually not craft in beer. Even in Lambic, there was always blending to try to get a house character that people wanted. So, I think that if I'm asking you, you may want something different. But if I'm asking you and you like Sriracha Ace, I want you to like the same things about it next time, even though it's a completely live product and there's nothing. We haven't messed with it at all. We just tried to make it the way we thought we wanted it to be.
I was just going to say, yeah, the real difference there is, the difference between an evolving product and an actual faulted product. And a lot of small producers will release products that are technically substandard. I've tasted plenty of wine under the natural rubric that it's just fucked up. Like it was wrong. I've had beer that was, it's wrong. It's very rare that you get booze that's technically like faulted.
Jack Daniels would be one of those things that's always faulted.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, or
maybe, but maybe
some
this
poorly
is
distilled product.
might be a good. I think this is a good segue for going to our reception. 'Cause
Yeah.
We have some excellent New York wine and some Brooklyn Brewery beer, and we should reconvene this group, and we should get George there too, so he can offer his perspective. And I wanted to thank the panelists very much for this, and I also. I wanted to thank the New School for providing this forum, and to Fabio, the director of the Food Studies program.